It started with a smell that didn't belong in a hospital, a sweet metallic hush that rode the air like a secret. I was halfway across the loading dock when the alarm chirped once, then again, then buried the afternoon under a strobe of red and the thin keening note of a building insisting it was in trouble. A nurse with a pixie cut physically thrusted a cart through the swing doors as if she could outrun the air itself. A respiratory therapist raised his palms like he could push the warning siren back into the ceiling. In the rectangle of sky above the ambulance bay, I saw her. Karen, the HOA president from the luxury community across the street, standing hard at the lip of the rooftop mechanical yard in a white blazer that flashed like an arrogant seagull. She had no badge, no clearance, and no conscience I could detect. But she had a clipboard and the brazen posture of someone who believes a property line is a crown. There were two men beside her in polos and sunglasses, the kind of hired bravado that pretends to be security when it's really just noise. They looked down at us like gods of the cul-de-sac. She looked down at us like a problem she was proud to have caused. I didn't have to guess what had happened because the building told me. I am the county's director of environmental health, which means when air goes wrong, it calls me by my first name. The dashboard on my phone lit up with falling pressure in the isolation wing. A chaotic seesaw of intake and exhaust that says someone forcibly intervened. The wing holds kids with fragile lungs and elders whose breath is already borrowed from tomorrow. You don't mess with air here. Not for a campaign sign, not for a grievance, not for a smug idea about property values. You don't mess with breath. Lock external intakes. I told the facility's chief, my friend Reggie, a calm man built like a linebacker and a metronome. Shift to internal recirculation and scrubbers. Protect ICU, NICU, isolation. Move the ER overflow to the west side tents and keep them sealed. Everyone else, masks on. Now. The radio hissed agreement and action, the best sound in the world when everything is about to go wrong. I moved through the loading bay where drivers were already lining up pallets of portable filters like bricks in a flood. A firefighter I knew from Wildfire Day, Sanchez, always too brave for his own ribs, caught my arm. "That her?" he asked, chin tipping toward the roof. "That's her," I said, and it felt like naming a storm that had been brewing all summer. For weeks she had circulated glossy mailers in her neighborhood decrying the hospital's temporary triage tents. She called them unsightly, unsanitary, unsafe. She wrote about a constant smell of illness, like it was an aesthetic offense and not the reality of a building where people come to live longer. She had tried to force the hospital to move the intake stacks away from her side of the road as if the sky obeyed the HOA last week. When the city denied her petition, she laughed in the council chamber and said the air would learn its place. She meant exactly what she said. I held up my phone. The building automation system fed me numbers like a pulse. Pressure off, intake compromised, one sensor flatlining and another spiking like a lie. There was a second smell now under the sweetness hot plastic. Something forced where it didn't fit. Reggie's voice rode the radio again. Internal scrubbing engaged. Patients sealed. No alarms in ICU. We're good for now. Copy, I said, and walked into the sunlight. The police chief, Hayes, pulled up in his unmarked and didn't bother with the door. He slid out in a single motion and followed my eyes to the roof. Karen flicked her wrist at us like we were street performers interrupting her brunch. She spoke into her phone and pointed not at the hospital but across the street, to the neighborhood entrance where a fountain sculpted to look like a pearl in a clam threw water into air it didn't understand. She had told her neighbors that fountain was their brand. She had built a life around brand, the shape of a thing instead of its soul. "Don't go up there," Hayes said. "Let them come down." But she had no intention of coming down. She straightened her jacket, and with a theatrical sweep of her hand toward the vents like they were her stage curtains, she raised her voice so the parking lot could hear. "This hospital has been polluting our neighborhood for months," she announced, triumph charged with adrenaline. "We are shutting down this illegal airflow event. Our community will not be poisoned by your negligence." She wasn't shutting down anything. She was committing a felony. The two men beside her shifted, one of them taking a single thoughtless step near the edge that made my stomach clench. Sanchez stepped forward, megaphone in hand. "Ma'am," he called, "back away from that equipment. This is critical infrastructure." You are endangering lives. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, she said. The words so coated in contempt they slid right off the air. We called our contractor. We have every right to inspect. Our bylaws permit. Your bylaws end at your curb. I said, not through a megaphone, but the way you say a thing that needs to be true enough to anchor boats. She met my gaze, and in the split-second intimacy of eye contact I saw something flicker. Not doubt, exactly, but calculation. She had believed we would hesitate, that the hospital would tiptoe, that the county would ask her permission to breathe. Hayes's officers moved to the door that led to the roof. A hospital security guard joined them, pale with fury and fear. Karen's men retreated just enough to reassure themselves they still controlled the moment. They didn't. The doors opened, and a seam of officers in blue and paramedics in yellow lined the staircase and the perimeter like a zipper stitching safety back onto the day. The first part of saving a life is sometimes just saying, out loud, that a life needs saving. I took the bullhorn from Sanchez and felt every wildfire season I'd ever fought settle into my bones. Attention staff and patients, I said, voice carrying to the corners of the building and the street beyond. Out of an abundance of caution, I am declaring an environmental health emergency for this facility and immediate surrounding area. All non-essential movement is paused. This is temporary. Follow staff directives. We will restore normal operations as soon as it's safe. The word emergency has a taste. Tastes like copper and certainty. You only use it when you must, because it pulls levers that cannot be politely unpulled. Hayes looked at me and nodded once, and the nod meant, do the job. He keyed his mic, all units. This is now a controlled scene under Environmental Health Authority. Secure the perimeter. Get hazmat headed this way. No one touches that rooftop equipment except Reggie's team. Karen's expression shifted Aga into indignation, then to delight, because she thought the word emergency lent her claims legitimacy. She made a show of pointing at an air monitor mounted on a pole in the staff lot and declaring, proof! But the monitor wasn't ours. It was one of hers, a cheap consumer device her Environment Committee had bolted to the pole weeks ago without permission, calibrated to panic and sponsored by a company that sells expensive machines to frighten people. It hadn't passed a single certified test. It had lit up burgundy the moment a diesel truck sneezed. Live streamers in her private HOA group called it evidence, and then fed each other the stew of fear and superiority that becomes policy when nobody sober shows up. Someone sober showed up. A man stepped out from the shadows of the parking garage, wearing a maintenance vest from the HOA's landscaping contractor, hat low, boots scuffed. He lingered near the ambulance where I stood, cleared his throat, and said in a voice so careful I almost missed the tremble, "Ma'am, my name's Leo. I do the irrigation, the fountain, all that. Ms. Karen told me yesterday to meet two guys at dawn by the alley behind the hospital. Said it was an inspection. But when I got there, they were laughing. Said we were gonna teach the hospital a lesson. I didn't go up, didn't feel right, but I heard the metal and the yelling, and I saw her point at the control panel through the door." He swallowed. "I got scared. I got a daughter who had RSV here last winter and they saved her. I got video. I didn't know who to give it to." He handed me a phone. His hands shook. On the screen, shot through the slats of a service stair, Karen's blazer gleamed, her finger stabbing at something I refuse to describe in this story, because there are things the wrong people should never learn. The men flanking her moved with the familiarity of a crew that has done dirty work before. They laughed again, that nervous braying laughter of men who think cruelty is a sport. Leo's video shuddered as he flinched when an alarm chirped. He whispered, "This is wrong," to the phone like a prayer and then stepped back. "Thank you," I said, making my voice soft so his courage had a safe place to land. "You did right." He nodded, jaw clenched. In that small nod was the twist the day needed, the unexpected ally Karen hadn't calculated. A quiet worker no one saw, whose love for his kid made him braver than the polished liars on a roof. I handed the phone to Hayes. He watched without blinking and held up 2 fingers to an officer. "Get that to evidence," he said, "and get those men in cuffs." The roof door opened again and the parade reversed. The men first, not laughing now, escorted between officers, then Karen. Chin lifted so high it looked like arrogance was the only air she trusted. She started speaking before her heels hit the landing. I am detaining this building for illegal emissions under the HOA's environmental. Ma'am, Hayes said, gentle like you talk to a child who's wandered past the end of the sidewalk. You are under arrest for interference with a medical facility, tampering with critical infrastructure, reckless endangerment, and criminal trespass. She laughed, a sound like ice in a glass. You don't have the courage. I don't need courage, he said. I have a warrantless arrest authority for on-view felonies. And I have a video. Her eyes flicked to Leonot to thank him or understand him, but to inventory him, as if she could audit a human soul and write it off when it didn't serve her. For the first time, a crack moved across her face, hairline thin and terrible. Do you know who I am? She asked me, not Hayes, because she still believed the right audience was all she needed. I speak to donors. I get council members elected. I have a board seat at... You had? Another voice said, cutting through the heat like shade. A woman in a navy dress approached, staff badge catching the light. I recognized her from budget meetings, quiet and stern Deputy Mayor Alina Ford. I just got off the phone with the hospital foundation, she said to Karen without a smile. They unanimously voted to ask for your resignation. Effective now. Karen's mouth opened and closed, empty of script. Hazmat rolled in without ceremony. A truck that looks like a lunchbox for giants, people inside it who wear moon suits like pajamas. They didn't sprint. They didn't flail. They moved with the calm that comes from knowing exactly how to make bad air better. Reggie's team guided them here, here, here. The building sighed as the scrubbers did the quiet work of forgiveness. The monitors on my phone stabilized one by one like kids calming on a nurse's shoulder. The smell evaporated, shamefaced, as if it realized it had no right to be here. By sunset, the emergency order shifted to advisory. By night, the advisory shrank to a paragraph on the county website and a flyer taped to cafeteria doors. No patients declined. No codes. The thing that could have been a tragedy became a lesson because enough people did their jobs on time. The lesson didn't end at the loading dock. It walked into a packed community hall 2 nights later when the council convened an open hearing, the kind where you can smell the democracy, the coffee in paper cups, the nervous sweat, the pencil shavings from reporters sharpening their questions. Every chair was full. The dais was a study in tight jaws. The hospital CEO sat with Reggie and our chief of medicine. Across the aisle, the HOA board team sat smaller than their chairs, eyes skittering like beetles under a porch light. Karen, on bail, wore a beige dress that wanted to whisper innocence and a face that wanted to scream that she was the victim here. Her lawyer, a man blessed with patience and doomed by his client, adjusted his tie 37 times. I gave my report in a voice that put facts in a row and made them stand there until people saw them. I explained which systems had been affected without telling the world how to repeat it. I explained how we knew human hands were involved. I explained the layers of protection that kept patients safe. I explained why calling something an environmental emergency isn't theater but a tool. When I finished, the room did that thing I love. It didn't applaud. It breathed. And then the questions came. A retired nurse rose slowly and said, I scrubbed in on lung transplants for 30 years. People like me count on people like you. Thank you. She turned on her cane to face the HOA board. Shame, she said. Not theatrical, just accurate. The word hung in the air like a weight finally allowed to drop. Then the twist none of us expected. Miguel, the HOA treasurer, asked to speak. Small, neat, and gray at the temples, he walked to the podium like a man heading to the dentist because he'd put it off too long. He unfolded papers with shaking fingers. I was told to classify purchases as community brand enhancements that were actually private gifts, he said. I was asked to pay a consulting firm that turned out to be the same 2 men arrested on the hospital roof. I was told our environment committee had authority to install devices on public poles. When I objected, I was threatened with removal and defamation. I resigned this morning. He placed a flash drive on the lectern. Emails, texts, Invoices. Audio recordings. Karen leapt to her feet. "He's lying," she blurted. "He's fragile. He has always been fragile." He imagines the quietest person in the room stood up. Mrs. Windsor, who bakes bread for the ICU nurses every Friday. "Stop," she said, and her voice reedy but rooted rippled like a bell. "We are finished letting you talk over people." The council chair banged a gavel as if to remind everyone that order isn't a suggestion. The city attorney accepted Miguel's drive like a priest taking a confession that might save a village. The police chief spoke into his mic. The live stream comments scrolled too fast to read. The room's center of gravity shifted away from Karen and toward something sturdier. Consequence. 2 weeks later, the board resigned en masse. The court appointed a receiver-an accountant with a spine of Roberto sort the books and returned the HOA to the humble business of landscaping and lighting. The district attorney filed charges that had weight and teeth. Karen's lawyer negotiated, then blanched, then negotiated again. The plea wasn't a mercy so much as a math problem. She would admit to interference with a medical facility and reckless endangerment. She would accept a felony that would bar her from holding office. She would pay restitution to the hospital and the county. She would perform community service that wasn't ribbon cutting but the gritty holiness of cleaning and hauling and sweating where nobody sees. She would attend restorative justice meetings where she'd have to sit across from the respiratory therapist who missed lunch while guarding a door, the janitor who scrubbed ductwork until midnight, Leo who filmed truth instead of swallowing it, and listen without speaking until her words could be safe again. If she failed, the suspended time would snap like a trap and the cell door would close. At sentencing, the judge didn't perform either. She laid the law down like a blanket. Not cozy, but covering what needed covering. "You confused aesthetics with ethics," she told Karen. "You chose appearance over life. The community you claim to protect will now go on without you in charge. If you are lucky, it will also go on with you redeemed. That choice is yours." It is easy to say the ending tasted sweet. Didn't. Tasted earned. The hospital ran drills with us for a month, even on rainy days. The city passed an ordinance clarifying that any tampering with critical infrastructure is a special offense with a special set of keys. The HOA threw its fountain's timer away and installed a small plaque that said water is precious. Let's not waste it, and nobody laughed because for once the words were simple and true. The triage tents remained until we didn't need them. A mural appeared on the cinderblock wall beside the ambulance bay, painted by neighborhood kids under a nurse's supervision. It showed a pair of lungs made of flowers, roots entwined, a sky above them green-blue and forgiving. The mural made people cry for reasons they didn't expect. Maybe because it proved the opposite of what Karen believed. That beauty arrives as a byproduct of doing the right thing, not the other way around. Leo brought his daughter to see it on a Sunday. She wore a pink hoodie and a sticker from her last well check that said brave in bubble letters. He squeezed my hand like a man who still couldn't believe he'd survived something, and maybe he hadn't before now. Not the arrest or the hearing or the sight of his phone in the evidence bag, but this standing here, breathing good air with his child and knowing he helped make it so. He didn't ask for a job, a favor, a medal. He asked for a photo in front of the mural. We took it. He cried. I pretended I didn't. As for Karen, I saw her once more. She was outside the hospital cafeteria on a foggy morning, picking up discarded masks with a grabber stick as part of her service. She wore a plain gray sweatshirt and no pearls. For a heartbeat, we looked at each other. Something moved across her face, fatigue, maybe. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I nodded. She nodded. I didn't need her apology. I needed her to understand what air is worth. Maybe she does now. Maybe she never will. Either way, the air is safer because enough people decided it would be. This is the part of the story where I tell you we celebrated with a parade or a plaque. We didn't. We had a staff potluck in the break room where the coffee machine rattles like a train and someone always brings a casserole with suspicious raisins. We laughed in that way that sounds like releasing a breath we'd been holding since the first alarm. Reggie tried to make a joke about adding exorcist to his facility's title, and everyone groaned because it was bad and perfect. The nurses danced in a small, silly circle that made the room less small and less silly. I walked out into the morning, which smelled like rain and pancakes from the diner across the street. The world wasn't fixed. It was just better for a while. Sometimes that's enough. If you stood in our parking lot that first afternoon, you'd have heard sirens, shouting, a megaphone, the hard peal of a gavel hammered hours later, and beneath it all something softer and stronger. A city choosing substance over shine. That sound is still in my ears when I drive past the fountain that now runs smaller, humbler, prettier for its restraint. You can look at the surface of a place and decide it's what matters, or you can look at the people and decide they are. In that choice lives the difference between a brand and a community, between sabotage and stewardship, between a headline and a life. That's my account of what happened when an HOA president tried to declare war on the air, and the air, with a lot of help, won. Tell me what you think, who was right, who was wrong, and what justice would look like if it were your hospital across the street.